Welcome back to the Perfectly Homeless podcast. We're continuing with the State Homeless Score Project. We are really making progress here with State episode, and today we're turning our focus to Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia is it's a really fascinating case study for this project.
It really is. And for those of you just joining us, the whole mission here is to evaluate the state's response to homelessness by, looking past those generic top-line statistics and actually digging into the lived reality on the ground.
Right, because evaluating a state is, it's never as simple as just looking at a single spreadsheet.
Exactly. So we are building a score dynamically as we talk, pulling from the actual systems and policies in place. And remember, we aren't revealing the final grade until the very end because this picture is going to shift significantly as we go.
Oh, it absolutely will. Because before we can even begin to assign a grade to Virginia, you have to grasp the sheer scale of the landscape.
Right.
So as of the January 2024 point-in-time count, there were over 7,141 Virginians experiencing homelessness on any given night.
Okay, but I was looking at the preliminary numbers comparing 2024 to 2025, and it showed a slight 1% decrease overall across the state.
Yeah, which sounds positive.
Right. On paper, if you're a lawmaker in Richmond, you might look at that and say, hey, we're making a tiny bit of progress here.
Sure, on paper. But a flat state average is incredibly deceptive. It's kind of like a blanket covering up this extreme regional volatility.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when you pull that blanket back and look at the regional hotspots, they tell a completely different and frankly alarming story. Like, take Fairfax County in Northern Virginia.
Okay.
Since 2019, homelessness there hasn't been flat at all. It has surged by 32%.
Wow, 32%.
Yeah, and if you look at the city of Richmond, they saw a massive sudden spike during the pandemic. In just one single year, the number of unhoused individuals jumped from 546 to 838.
It's wild because you might be driving through Fairfax County right now, looking at the massive tech corridors, the data centers, and all the luxury apartments going up, and wondering how there could possibly be a homelessness crisis in one of the wealthiest areas in the country.
Exactly. But it's that very wealth that is accelerating the crisis.
It's like taking the average temperature of a room where one half is freezing and the other half is on fire and declaring that it's a comfortable 70 degrees.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right, and this is exactly why we are grading this state category by category.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the very foundation of the crisis, which is our first area of evaluation, housing affordability.
Okay.
Because to understand why someone ends up on the street, you have to understand the mechanics of what it actually takes to keep a roof over their head.
Let's run the math on this because this is where the reality completely disconnects from the policy.
The math is brutal. The statewide minimum wage in Virginia currently sits at $12.41 an hour. So if a single earner works a standard 40-hour week, year-round, and follows that standard rule of not spending more than 30% of their income on housing.
Right, the affordability rule.
Exactly. They can afford about $645 a month in rent.
Wait, $645?
Yeah.
I don't think you can even rent a single bedroom in a shared house in Fairfax for $645 anymore. Have you looked at the rental market lately?
I have, and the numbers just do not work. The fair market rent, which is, the government's calculation for a standard non-luxury one-bedroom apartment in Virginia, is $1,151 a month.
Oh, wow.
So right out of the gate, you are nearly double what a minimum wage worker can actually afford.
That's insane.
And in places like Fairfax County, the math becomes catastrophic. The fair market rent for a two-bedroom apartment there is $2,340. To afford that without being severely cost-burdened, a single parent would need to earn over $40 an hour.
So we have to stop thinking of this as just a, tough market. It's mathematically impossible. I hear people say, well, they just need to work harder.
Right.
But a minimum wage worker in Virginia has to work 71 hours a week just to afford a basic one-bedroom apartment. 71 hours. That's nearly 2 full-time jobs just to exist indoors.
And that doesn't even account for food, healthcare, or transportation.
Exactly. It's not a treadmill that's speeding up. It's a game of musical chairs. The state's population keeps growing, so more players in the game. But the state is short 300,000 affordable rental homes.
Yeah, they removed 300,000 chairs from the room.
When the music stops, hundreds of thousands of people mathematically have to be left standing no matter how hard they work.
And it's not just about the monthly rent either. It's the mechanism of how landlords screen tenants. When demand is that high, Landlords require proof of income that is 3 times the monthly rent.
Right.
They require flawless credit scores. So even if a minimum wage worker somehow saves up the security deposit, they were structurally blocked from signing the lease.
When you look at a 300,000 unit deficit and a screening process designed to filter out low-wage earners, wow, this shifts the score.
Yeah, it really does.
We are going to have to establish a very low initial baseline for this draft. I'm putting the draft score at an F right out of the gate for affordability.
Which logically forces us to look at the next safety net. I mean, if the private housing market is locked off, the pressure pushes directly onto shelter access.
Right, so if 7,141 people are experiencing homelessness in Virginia, how many emergency shelter beds do we actually have to catch them?
Across the entire state, there are only 4,299 year-round emergency shelter beds.
Wait, that is nearly a 3,000 bed deficit. So mathematically, on any given night, 3,000 Virginians literally have nowhere to go.
Exactly. Now, some areas did try to innovate to close that gap, especially during the pandemic. Like Richmond successfully pivoted to using non-congregate hotel shelters.
Oh, right.
Instead of a massive room with 50 cots, people had their own rooms.
I have to push back on that, though. Using private hotels sounds great in an emergency, but aren't those private businesses? Did the city just, commandeer them, or was this a massive government payout to hotel owners?
That's a fair question.
Uh-huh.
No, it wasn't a hostile takeover. Cities used federal relief funds to lease empty inventory when travel plummeted.
Oh, I see.
But the real mechanism of why it worked wasn't just the physical building. Richmond actually added the necessary staff to keep these locations open 24/7.
That's huge.
It is. They brought in wraparound services, mental health professionals, housing navigators right on site. Normally, congregate shelters force everyone out at 7 a.m. and don't let them back in until 5 p.m.
Right, which makes it impossible to hold a job.
Exactly. By allowing people to stay 24/7, you provide the baseline stability needed to actually apply for jobs or find permanent housing.
But that brings us back to the core issue. Is a 3,000 bed deficit statewide a physical space issue or a funding priority issue? Because Richmond proved that when the priority and the federal dollars were there, the space suddenly materialized.
It is almost entirely a funding and priority issue. The physical space exists, unused commercial properties, vacant lots, older hotels.
Right.
But staffing a facility 24/7, paying for security, providing case management, that requires sustained political will. When that political will evaporates, the beds disappear, and you get that massive deficit.
Incredible. As this lowers the overall picture, we were already at an F for affordability. And knowing that the emergency safety net is missing thousands of vital threads, our draft score is staying firmly in the failing range.
Which brings us to a very dark reality. Because if there are no affordable homes to rent and there are 3,000 fewer shelter beds than people who need them, those individuals don't just vanish.
Right, they have to go somewhere.
They have to exist in public spaces. Which brings us to criminalization and enforcement.
How does Virginia treat a human being who mathematically has nowhere else to go?
This is where local ordinances create an absolute maze of penalties. Under Virginia State Code Section 15.2926, local governments are granted sweeping authorization to prevent loitering.
Loitering, just existing outside.
In practice, yeah, this fails to distinguish between someone causing a genuine public disturbance and someone who is simply exhausted and needs to sleep. We know of at least 16 communities in Virginia that actively penalize basic life-sustaining activities.
So if you are sleeping on a park bench because the shelter is full, you become a criminal. Let's break down that $145 a day statistic we were looking at earlier because it is staggering.
It really is. It costs the taxpayer $145 a day to keep someone in a local jail.
Okay.
If they experience a mental health crisis on the street and end up in a psychiatric hospital, it costs $1,060 a day.
Wow.
But to provide supportive housing, a permanent apartment with a social worker checking in, it costs $71 a day.
Why is the jail cost so incredibly high compared to housing?
Because you aren't just paying for a cot. You are paying for the massive bureaucracy of incarceration. The arresting officer's time, the booking process, the guards, the administrative staff, the liability of medical care behind bars.
The food service.
Exactly. It is an incredibly bloated, expensive way to handle someone whose only actual crime is extreme poverty.
And the punishment actually makes the original problem worse, doesn't it?
Exponentially worse. The data shows that a single arrest increases a person's likelihood of experiencing chronic, long-term homelessness by 5 times.
Wait, 5 times? Just from one arrest?
Yes. The mechanism is simple. When you are arrested, Your tent and your backpack are usually thrown in a dumpster by the city.
Oh, man.
That means you lose your birth certificate, your ID, your medications, then you get a criminal record. So when you finally get out and try to apply for one of those rare affordable apartments, the landlord runs a background check, sees a trespassing or loitering charge, and throws your application in the trash.
It is a totally localized cycle of destruction. But it's not the whole story, right? Because there is a massive legislative tug-of-war happening in Richmond right now.
Right.
You have these harsh local laws, but state lawmakers are pushing back. We are looking at House Bill 1394, known as the Right to Rest Bill, and House Bill 2602.
Yes.
These are state-level efforts explicitly designed to stop localities from arresting people just for sleeping in public or in legally parked cars.
Exactly. The state is looking at the $145 a day and realizing it is a complete mathematical failure. They are trying to strip local municipalities of the power to criminalize survival.
So we have this intense tension. You have 16 local communities actively punishing people while the state legislature is fighting to decriminalize them. Based on this, the current draft score is, well, let's just pause and look at where we stand. Okay, so we have reached the midpoint of our evaluation. If you are tracking this with us, we are looking at our preliminary draft score for Virginia. Right now, balancing the harsh economics and the local criminalization against the state's legislative pushback, the draft score is sitting at a solid D.
Yeah, that seems accurate for now.
But I want to emphasize to you, the listener, this is not the final score. We still have to evaluate the reality of vehicle dwelling, the effectiveness of the boots-on-the-ground social services, and the pathways to permanent housing.
And those categories could radically alter the final grade.
Absolutely. So let's keep going.
Let's transition into vehicle dwelling friendliness. Because when public sleeping is heavily policed and the shelters are full, a vehicle becomes the ultimate last resort.
Right. It's basically a metal tent on wheels.
Exactly. But is a car actually a safe haven in Virginia?
From what we are seeing, it is incredibly chaotic. It's not a unified state policy. It's a complete county-by-county patchwork.
It is deeply fragmented. If you are in Fairfax, Loudoun, or Prince William counties, the wealthy areas near Washington, D.C., you are dealing with incredibly strict zoning laws.
Right.
They typically prohibit RV living on residential property altogether.
Why? I mean, what is the mechanism behind banning someone from sleeping in an RV in a private driveway?
It comes down to property values and rigid health codes. The zoning classifications treat RVs as temporary structures, not permanent dwellings.
Okay.
That means if you try to live in one, the county claims you are running afoul of health and safety codes regarding water and sewage hookups, even if you are managing your waste perfectly well.
So the neighbors can just call it in.
Exactly. It gives neighbors an immediate mechanism to call code enforcement and have you evicted from your own vehicle.
And what if you move into the cities?
Places like Richmond and Charlottesville enforce overnight street parking bans. You might get 24 to 72 hours maximum before your car is ticketed, booted, or towed.
And if your car is towed, you lose your shelter, your transportation to your job, and all your belongings in one swoop.
It's devastating.
It highlights the absolute absurdity of invisible geographic lines. You could be sleeping in your van, and simply by driving across a county border, you transform overnight from a peaceful resident into a criminal violator.
The rules flip instantly.
But I do have to point out the exceptions, right? Rural counties in Southwest Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley tend to have far fewer restrictions.
Sure.
And according to our sources, Virginia Beach actually offers specific designated oversized vehicle parking at the 4th Street, Croatan, and Little Island lots.
That is a crucial detail. It is incredibly rare for a city to formally designate space for oversized vehicles, and it provides at least a pocket of predictability for people who are living transiently in their vehicles.
Yeah, they know they won't be woken up by a flashlight tapping on the glass at 3 a.m. It's amazing, and this raises the overall picture. The strict urban zoning laws are brutal and exclusionary. But acknowledging those pockets of rural flexibility and the specific intentional parking provisions in places like Virginia Beach brings a little bit of balance to this category. It bumps our draft score up slightly.
But navigating those invisible lines, knowing where to park, how to avoid the tickets, how to get your ID back after an arrest, that requires a massive amount of support.
Which leads perfectly into outreach and social services. If the system is a maze, what do the guides look like? What is the boots-on-the-ground support system doing for someone trying to survive this?
The data here is actually quite striking. Let's look at the Central Virginia Continuum of Care. They're reporting a 98% success rate for exits from permanent housing.
Wait, 98%.
Yes. That means when they finally manage to get someone into a stable, permanent home, 98% of the time, that person stays housed and does not return to the street.
Okay, how do they actually achieve that? Because it can't just be handing someone a flyer with a 1-800 number on it.
No, it requires intense structural case management. A continuum of care is basically a network of local agencies that share a centralized database.
Oh, okay.
This means a traumatized person doesn't have to retell their story and fill out the same paperwork 50 times at 50 different churches.
That is so important.
But the real secret to the 98% success rate is landlord engagement. Outreach workers literally act as diplomats. They use mitigation funds to guarantee the lease, they co-sign, and they provide ongoing wraparound mental health care.
So if a tenant has a crisis, the landlord calls the social worker instead of calling the police?
Exactly. They bypass those stringent credit checks through relationships and guaranteed funding.
That is an incredible success rate. But getting them into that housing in the first place is still a massive bottleneck.
Oh, definitely.
I was reading the reports from the Lamb Center, which is a major day shelter in Fairfax, and they outline the daily grinding barriers their outreach workers face. They are dealing with guests navigating serious, untreated physical and mental disabilities, and just basic transportation. Like if you don't have a car, how do you get across Fairfax County to a job interview or drop your kid at daycare or make a doctor's appointment?
And you mentioned kids, which brings up a very heavy intersection. In Central Virginia, Lynchburg City had the highest number of Child Protective Services referrals in the region. 870 cases in a single fiscal year.
870.
Yeah. The mechanism here is that housing instability triggers child welfare interventions. Homelessness is rarely an isolated issue. It is deeply intertwined with family crisis and systemic poverty.
This is where I have to ask the hard question. We have amazing localized outreach, 98% success rates when they get people housed.
Yeah.
But is localized outreach, no matter how dedicated and brilliant these social workers are, actually enough to combat systemic structural poverty? You have families falling into the CPS system because they can't afford rent, and outreach workers are out there fighting against a tidal wave of macroeconomic barriers.
And so,
Are we just putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound?
well, outreach is the triage. It stops the bleeding,
Uh-huh.
keeps people alive. But you are right, it cannot cure the underlying disease. The cure relies entirely on supply.
Which brings us to our final area of evaluation, pathways to permanent housing. Because all of this outreach, all of these shelters, all of this survival, it eventually has to lead to an exit strategy. Does Virginia have a realistic pathway out?
We have to start by revisiting that massive number we talked about at the beginning, the 300,000 affordable rental home deficit.
Missing chairs?
Right. That is the fundamental roadblock. However, there are significant state-led efforts trying to carve a path through that roadblock.
Like what is the state actually doing to bypass the deficit?
So during the pandemic, the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development launched a massive emergency rental and mortgage assistance program. They started with a $50 million allocation from the Coronavirus Relief Fund.
$50 million is a solid start.
But what was crucial about this wasn't just the dollar amount. It was the mechanism of distribution. They intentionally targeted communities of color and households at imminent risk of eviction.
Right.
And they contracted with over 30 local agencies to get those funds distributed quickly, bypassing a lot of the usual red tape.
And at the local level, we saw some really smart systemic collaborations. The Urban Institute highlighted how in Richmond there was a strong, intentional collaboration between healthcare providers, like the Daily Planet Health Services, and homeless outreach.
That integration is vital. By treating healthcare and housing as the same issue, they kept COVID-19 infection rates among the unhoused population well below the state average.
Wow.
Yeah, when you integrate healthcare, a doctor can effectively prescribe housing as a medical intervention, which opens up entirely new streams of funding.
Seeing the state mobilize $50 million, distribute it equitably, and seeing healthcare systems step up, wow, this shifts the score.
It really highlights a bright spot.
It shows a structural willingness at the highest levels to help, even if the macroeconomic headwinds of the housing shortage are fierce.
So we have evaluated the landscape. We've seen the brutal math, the punishing local laws, the incredible localized successes, and the systemic bottlenecks.
It is time to synthesize this journey and lock in the final grades.
Let's do it.
We are entering our final summary to assign the official perfectly homeless state score for Virginia. Let's recap the major strengths and weaknesses we've uncovered.
Okay, on the strength side, we have to acknowledge the state-level legislative pushes. Bills like HB 1394 and HB 23602 show a real intent to decriminalize survival.
Absolutely.
We also saw highly effective targeted emergency rental relief programs and localized triumphs like the 98% success rate for permanent housing exits in Central Virginia, driven by brilliant wraparound case management.
But the weaknesses are severe and structural. We are looking at a mathematically impossible housing market for minimum wage workers, driven by a 300,000 unit deficit.
Yeah.
We have a terrifying shortage of thousands of emergency shelter beds, and a chaotic, punishing patchwork of local anti-camping and vehicle zoning laws that turn geography into a trap.
Based on that, let's assign the specific category grades.
Go for it.
For housing affordability, an F. The gap between wages and rent is insurmountable for too many, and the 300,000 unit shortage locks them out.
Makes sense.
For shelter access, D. A 3,000-bed deficit cannot be ignored, despite Richmond's excellent innovations with non-congregate hotels.
Right.
For criminalization and enforcement, D state legislative hopes are currently overshadowed by the reality of 16 communities criminalizing survival.
Okay, what about vehicles?
For vehicle dwelling friendliness, AC. It's a rigid patchwork of strict urban bans, somewhat balanced by permissive rural zones and specific lots in Virginia Beach.
And the boots on the ground.
For outreach and social services, B, incredible dedication, landlord mitigation strategies, and 98% success rates from local workers fighting an uphill battle.
Awesome. And the final category?
For pathways to permanent housing, C, strong emergency financial interventions and healthcare integrations, but fundamentally blocked by the massive housing shortage.
Which brings us to the final reveal. Based on the deep tension between good state-level intentions and harsh local-level economic and legal realities, the final perfectly homeless state score for Virginia is a D+.
The justification here is clear. Virginia earns a D+, because while the state is showing real ambition to reform its laws and fund emergency relief, the localized reality on the ground remains deeply punishing.
Exactly.
You cannot outreach a 300,000 fund home deficit, and you cannot build a healthy community when local ordinances actively criminalize the very people the state is trying to help.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We talked about the financial absurdity of criminalization earlier, but I want you to really think about what it says about our societal priorities when we are willing to spend $145 of taxpayer money every single day to throw a human being in a jail cell simply for being too poor to exist in public, when it would cost exactly half that amount to just provide them with supportive housing. It's not just a moral failure, it is a mathematical failure.
Absolutely.
That's the perfectly homeless state score for Virginia.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in, Bakri. If you find the series interesting, please tap the like and subscribe buttons, and we will see you in the next state.
If you'd like to support the project, click on over to the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and get yourself a warm hoodie with our logo, or you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/perfectlyhomeless. Every purchase and donation helps fund future episodes in this 50-state journey through homelessness in America. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next episode.